Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that to my attention. So you know all of this, it's the same link, it's the same intro. So staffing secondary general education teachers, middle and high school. Again, with the focus on not just the technical, but also the political and practical. The first of the three things I want to talk about is staffing with decimal level precision. Also want to then translate that into how that might be a strategy to reduce the use of provisionally certified staff, which is something that I know more and more school systems are being forced to do given the difficulty of hiring fully certified teachers. And lastly, creating some incentives for teachers in schools to embrace some of these strategies, because we know from talking to superintendents and chief business officers and principals that there are times where they've wanted to use these strategies, but they're getting pushback. So we want to talk about how do you counteract some of that pushback. So let's talk about the first foundational idea is how do you staff with the greatest level of precision, with respect to everybody. I know nobody is staffing willy-nilly. Everybody is taking time and energy to figure out how much staff they need. But often what we find is if you've got 5 teachers in, say, the math department this year, you are pretty likely to have 5 teachers in the math department next year, unless there's really major changes. But let's face it, to drop an entire math teacher, that's 1 in 5, it's not typical that your enrollment's dropping by 20%. So because the changes from year to year can be pretty small, the staffing tends to be pretty consistent from year to year. What we're suggesting is you start with this decimal level calculation to figure out exactly how much staff do you really need. And the way you do that is you list every course you're offering in a middle school or a high school. You look at the enrollment, how many kids have signed up for that course. So in this example, algebra's got 120 kids, geometry 130 kids, and so on. You set your class size target. And you may look at these targets and say, hey, that's too big. That's fine. Maybe you're going to set them at 20 for algebra, and maybe pre-calculus might be a little bigger because it's a different kind of class or calculus. But you set the class size target, the maximum class size that you're comfortable with. And that will tell you how many sections you have. And I know that many of you on this call are already doing this. If you're not doing it, you definitely should be, but I know many of you are. And that's going to tell you that you've got 22 sections of math. But now the question is, what do you do once you know that it's 22 sections? So we want to calculate exactly what we need in the way of staffing. So 22 sections. If every full-time teacher teaches 5 sections, that says I need 4.4 teachers. Remember where we had 5. And I think in a lot of the world where math teachers are hard to come by and you don't want to get rid of a great teacher, you'd say, okay, we needed 4.4, we've got 5, that's the appropriate staffing. And so this is just a little bit of rounding up. But the rounding up, when you do it across every department, really does, in many schools we've worked with, including schools in Vermont, the rounding up is in the hundreds of thousands and sometimes $300,000 or $400,000 of rounding up. And so the question is, what do you do instead? So the first thing I want to just share that we're going to give you a link to just a simple Excel tool that if you want to calculate exactly how many sections you need and exactly how many staff you need by department, we've got an Excel tool that looks a little fancier and a little better than what I just shared on the screen before. So if you aren't running these calculations or you want a tool to help you run them, we will give you that tool. It'll be available on the AOE's website as well. But so now the question is, what do you do with that 4.4 instead of just rounding up to 5? And so we've got a number of strategies. And again, one of the things that a lot of people have said when they've heard this kind of strategy before is, Nate, I know we need 4.4, but in this job market, if we go out looking for a 0.4, we're going to lose somebody. And so if you're going to have 5 teachers, because you clearly have the capacity to offer 25 classes. And what most people do who have the capacity for 25 classes, you needed 22, is you have slightly smaller classes. Everybody's schedule gets filled with 5 periods each teacher. If you're using scheduling software, it automatically does that for you. But so what do you do? One possibility is there really are people out there that want to work part-time. They're generally retired teachers or former teachers who stepped out of the field because they're caring for young children. We also are seeing some non-traditional roles that want part-time work, like an artist who has a side hustle. They are an artist, but they also want a more steady salary, so they want to be an artist and a part-time teacher. We've also seen some retired engineers, particularly for the sciences, or people who are fluent in a second language, where you're looking for foreign language teachers. So one thing is to know, hey, we really could look in different places. And I know that some districts have said, hey, we have tried this. But if you are advertising in all the places that traditional people look for full-time jobs, we shouldn't be shocked that you didn't find the part-time people who are looking for part-time jobs, because they weren't looking in those places. So we do know that districts have had success finding these kind of non-traditional folks or people who have exited the workforce but would be willing to come back. But it does take more effort and a different set of energies. So if you've tried it and it didn't work, I wouldn't give up on it yet, but not to fear. There are other strategies that you might like better if this one doesn't play to your preferences. So remember I said we needed 4.4 teachers and we were rounding up to 5. One thing we have seen some districts do with great success is, what if you had just 4 teachers, just 4, so they're all full-time positions, so you don't have to deal with that part-time stuff, but you asked your existing 4 teachers, would you be willing to take on an extra class for $10,000 or more dollars? We have found that a lot of teachers, particularly younger teachers, are working second jobs or summer jobs. We have found that $10,000 is a very compelling number. And if you think about it in this example, you would pay 2 teachers, only if they volunteered, a total of $20,000, and that would have eliminated the need for a full-time teacher. It also tends to be really exciting for 2 teachers who had summer or weekend jobs to be able to give those jobs up. So this is actually a retention strategy as well as a financial strategy. Again, only works if you've got 2 teachers who wanted to do it, but definitely worth asking. And that way you're going to cover everything you needed. We've also seen, and this tends to be done by districts that have set fairly low target class sizes. So if I see, and I did this as a superintendent when my budget got tight, I said, hey, what would happen if we had 5 teachers, we needed 4.4, didn't want to mess with part-time staff? What would happen if I added a couple students to each class? Would that be enough to be able to go from that 4.4 down to 4? Now I would still be saving a position. It depends on which classes, it depends on where you set your targets. But I'm telling you that, again, why we built that Excel tool, change one number, it'll ripple through, and see what happens if adding just a couple kids, particularly if you started from a relatively low number, would that allow you, because you're not really going from 5 to 4. You're going from 4.4 to 4, but still saving a full-time position. So run slightly larger sections, or at least calculate whether that's an option. We're also seeing a growing number of middle and high schools, and some of your middle and high schools are on the same campus, some are not. But we are seeing, if you want to make sure that everybody has a full-time job, and say the high school only needed 4.4, and I'm paying somebody for 5 5 periods, so we didn't really need them for 5 periods. We are finding more and more middle and high schools sharing staff. Now, I'll acknowledge you need to have your bell schedules aligned. You need to schedule these two buildings together. This is not a do it completely super simple way of doing it, but it is our prediction that in the future, more and more middle and high schools are going to be sharing staff, not just because of finances, but because there aren't enough foreign language teachers, science teachers, and math teachers, and maybe even special educators, that we're going to be able to round up in 2 schools. And this is a way of getting the most out of the staff you have, because there is a fair amount of overlap with some of the skills it would take, say, to teach a foreign language in both the middle school and the high school level. This last opportunity is one that is really good for kids and happens to be good for the budget. Again, we needed 4.4 teachers. We've got 5 math teachers. We want to have 5 full-time teachers. So none of this, I don't believe you, Nate, we're not going to find these part-time people, but we still have 3 extra periods of capacity in one of these teachers. And as a result, what we're seeing some schools do is they say, hey, when we interview kids and we ask them what electives would they like, what courses beyond the core would they like, it turns out that a lot of the elective classes kids really want can be taught by core subject teachers. It can be taught by, math teachers can teach the math of fantasy sports. That's a real class. It's very popular. English teachers, if you had extra capacity, are teaching an elective in writing science fiction or writing or discussing graphic novels. We're seeing social studies teachers take on electives in current events. Turns out kids want electives that are well taught by core teachers. So this core teacher could pick up 3 periods. Now you ask yourself, how does that save you money? It assumes if you're doing this, that you're able to pair this decision with decreasing your elective staffing. Why? Because if you have 3 more elective periods, you actually don't need all of the elective classes you already have. And so imagine if you also had some rounding up going on your elective side, which we often see. You would be able to often reduce an entire person out of the elective side by beefing up some of the electives from the core side. Again, this doesn't work in every school, depending on your needs, but we're finding this seems to work in about half the schools we've analyzed. So that's hopefully a number of strategies around what do you do rather than just round up. Couple other ways of these strategies, again, rather than rounding up, if I need it, can I have slightly fewer sections needed? Because every time you need fewer sections, that might make the ability to drop an entire position. So we've seen some schools combine low enrollment courses. So Art 2, Art 3, and watercolors, all pretty small. They become one class where all 3 things are being taught. That too might just mean that you can drop from 6 teachers to 5 teachers. We've also seen in that same kind of strategy offering certain electives every other year because they're all small, but you offer 2 this year and 2 the next year, and just like almost every college has done. These are all strategies so that you can not round up, but you can round down and still keep full-time positions. Now, the other thing we want to think about, because people are often saying, I don't want to lose a teacher, and many of these strategies are about losing positions. We want to put a slightly different spin on this. And again, you've got great teachers, and it's always, nobody wants to lose a teacher. But we have seen across the state a significant increase in provisional and emergency licensed teachers. And sometimes we're saying, hey, this is a teacher who's not as prepared as we would like, but given what we have, what the market is available, this is what we're going to hire because it's the best person we can get, and hopefully we can build up their skills. If you are rounding down, and that rounding down means you don't have to hire a provisional or emergency licensed person, that could be a really good thing, because all of these strategies will put more kids in front of fully certified staff. And so really trying to think about that rounding up isn't always great for kids. Because I think too often when I share this strategy, people think it's only a bad thing. But we know some positions are hard to fill. We know you're using provisionally certified staff, and maybe we could use less of that. Then the last thing I want to share with you all today is this idea of creating incentives for both teachers and schools to embrace the strategies we've already talked about. And here's the deal. Principals are in the best position to make precision staffing work. You know, it's really hard to get all of this precision staffing fully mapped out at the central office. And if a principal is really wanting to make this work, great things happen. But often principals oppose precision staffing, not because they're wasteful, but because it is a headache, hence this photo. It can be hard to do precision staffing, but when principals want it to happen, they actually find more ways to do it than if they're kind of hoping it would go away. So how do you get principals to think this is as good for the school as it is for the district? And one way is by giving principals more autonomy. What I mean by that is there is a strategy where you build through all these calculations exactly how many FTE you would need in a building. And let's say it comes to 34 and a half, but then you let the principal do all of the staffing any which way he or she wants, so long as they stay within that total. They may move things around. So rather than telling the principal, this is how we want you to allocate the staff from all these nice formulas, we say, hey, the formula said this is how many teachers we should have. How would you allocate them? We have found some principals really like this and would really embrace that extra autonomy. We've also been suggesting and have seen some school systems say to a principal, hey, if we do some of these precision staffing, half of the savings will go into a fund for the school to spend however they wish, so that they actually see that they're gaining something that's good for their school, not just for their for the district as a whole. So that's creating a financial incentive, if you will. They don't get to take the money home, but they do get to spend it on their school in a way that they think is important. And then the last is because one of the biggest things principals do not want to do is lose a great teacher. And I get that. But you can do what's called attrition contingency staffing that says, hey, we know from these numbers that if a teacher left, we might not actually need to replace them, or we wouldn't have to replace them fully. So having a budget that says we will, even at the time you vote the budget, to say that we will not replace a position, say in the math department, if a math teacher left. So it means that you're not losing a math teacher if they all want to stay, but it also means that if one of them left, you haven't locked yourself into fully replacing them either. And this can really help principals get on board with it, because they're not against the precision staffing. They're actually just nervous, and I don't blame them, about losing a really good teacher. So that is a fairly walk through. And again, my apologies for talking to you around the wrong topic. Come back to later if you want to learn more about interventionists. And again, we want to take your questions, shoot a picture of the QR code, and happy to get back to you with an answer. So I'll give you that for another 5 seconds or so to take a picture. And with that, we will call it a session and one of my greatest embarrassments of the month.
Oh, Nate, no need to be embarrassed at all. We really appreciate the quick pivot, and I think we got through the materials, which is excellent. Folks, I think that between David and my team, there There are a couple of links that have been posted in the chat a little bit earlier. So you should, if you couldn't grab the picture on the slide deck, you should be able to get links to the documents shared and to the open Q&A form. So I will stay in this meeting for just a few minutes if folks need to collect that info. And otherwise, thank you all so much. And feel free to hop over to our next one. Nate, I will not be at that one. Have an excellent rest of your day. Taylor is there and
Thanks.
ready to help.
Thanks to you all.
Thank you, everybody.